The body of 28-year-old Mohammed Muhyiddin was found in a ditch near London's Heathrow Airport on October the 31st of 2021. He'd been fatally shot in the back, and investigators would subsequently determine that one of his friends had been responsible. 39-year-old Chirag Amir Chirag was arrested in November. He told law enforcement that he'd been asked to transport the firearm used in the killing, an Agram 2002 submachine gun fitted with a silencer, when it accidentally went off as he placed it in the back seat of a Toyota Prius. Muhyiddin, who'd been in the passenger seat, was fatally shot. Prosecutors agreed that the killing had been accidental, but would argue that Chirag had lied about his intentions with the weapon, which was readied and primed for use in an attack. He and Muhyiddin, along with several companions, had been involved in an earlier conflict with a group of men. During the altercation, another associate of theirs, Mohammed Shakil, had brandished an imitation revolver while Chirag had pulled out the Agram. Prosecutors believe that they were preparing for a ride-out against their rivals when the submachine gun went off, derailing their plans and leaving them scrambling to cover up Muhyiddin's death. By late November of 2022, Shakil had pleaded guilty to possession of an imitation firearm with intent to cause fear of violence, while a jury convicted Chirag of manslaughter and possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. An unnamed male teenager admitted perverting the course of justice for setting the Prius alight in the incident's aftermath. Subsequent developments in the case indicated that the sentencing for all three was scheduled for February the 10th of 2023. Number 6. Edward Haffey and Michael Kuhnhausen. On the evening of September the 6th of 2006, a hammer-wielding intruder ambushed Oregon nurse Susan Kuhnhausen in her South Portland home after she'd returned from work. Susan, who was at the time in her early 50s, fought relentlessly as the intruder, 59-year-old Vietnam veteran Edward Dalton Haffey, struck her repeatedly. In the ensuing struggle, the nurse managed to wrestle the claw hammer away from Haffey and swung its claw several times into his head. Susan repeatedly asked him, "Who sent you?" as she then squeezed her hands around his throat. She let go moments later and tried to flee, but Haffey caught up with her in the hallway outside her bedroom and punched her to the floor. Susan managed to pull the man down with her and repeatedly bit into his arm, thigh, flank, and even into his genitals through his zipper. She then flipped Haffey onto his stomach, hooked her arm around his neck, and applied a chokehold. The middle-aged woman tightened her forearm against his throat until he stopped moving. She fled outside with the hammer, and her neighbors called the police. Susan's fight for her life later became the focus of national news, with the Portland Police Bureau giving her its Civilian Medal of Heroism in honor of her sheer determination to survive. Haffey, who had a lengthy criminal record that included serving 9 years for conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, was pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy revealed he'd had a nearly fatal dose of cocaine in his system at the time of attacking Susan. Haffey was regarded as a burglar who'd somehow managed to bypass the home's alarm system. A backpack he'd left at the scene would reveal that he was actually a hitman. A day planner inside the backpack had "Call Mike" written down on September the 4th, and in a folder, Haffey had jotted the cell phone number of Susan's estranged husband, Michael. Haffey had worked for the latter at his adult video store. At the time of the attempt on Susan's life, she and Michael were in the midst of a turbulent divorce. Michael, who was set to get their house in the event of Susan's death, had offered Haffey $50,000 to kill his wife and make it look like a burglary gone wrong. He'd provided him with the security code to the home, which Susan hadn't changed since he'd moved out. Michael was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to soliciting aggravated murder. He died of prostate cancer while incarcerated. Number 5. Kenneth Smith and John Forrest Parker. On March the 18th of 1988, Elizabeth Sennett, a 45-year-old pastor's wife from Alabama, was found dead at her Colbert County home. The woman had been bludgeoned and stabbed 8 times in the chest and once in each side of her neck. Investigators would eventually determine that her husband, Charles, had orchestrated her murder. The West Side Church of Christ pastor, who was having an affair at the time, had taken out a large insurance policy on Elizabeth and then plotted her murder in order to settle his substantial debts. Roughly a week after his wife's killing, as investigators were closing in on him as a suspect, Charles took his own life. The authorities found that he'd paid a man named Billy Gray Williams $3,000 for the hit on Elizabeth. Williams, in turn, hired 19-year-old John Forrest Parker and Kenneth Eugene Smith, aged 22, promising $1,000 to each of them. They approached Elizabeth at her home, claiming that Charles had given them permission to examine the property as a potential hunting site. Parker and Smith gained access to the house by asking to use the bathroom. Once inside, they beat Elizabeth with a galvanized pipe and knifed her to death before stealing items to make it appear as if a violent burglary had occurred. Smith and Parker were tied to the killing by hair and material fibers found at the scene, as well as a VCR taken from the home that was later found at Smith's residence. Williams, the man who'd hired them, was sentenced to life without parole for his role in the brutal murder, while they were convicted of capital murder. In the legal proceedings that followed, a jury returned a verdict of life imprisonment without parole for Parker, but the trial judge overruled the verdict and sentenced him to death. He was executed via lethal injection in June of 2010. Smith was initially given the capital punishment as well, but on appeal, the jury considered his character and life circumstances as mitigating factors, ultimately voting 11-1 for a life sentence. Much like with Parker, the decision was overruled by a judge who sentenced Smith to death. In 2017, Alabama became the last state to repeal judicial override, but Smith's punishment was set to carry on. Updates indicated that he'd been granted a stay of execution as officials had failed to find a vein on his body to administer the lethal injection on November the 17th of 2022, the day he was scheduled to die. Number 4. Disappearance of Jarrett Clark. 18-year-old Jarrett Clark was reported missing in May of 2006, shortly after a graduation party at a campsite on Wahoo Bay, Oklahoma. Law enforcement tracked the location of Jarrett's phone to a dumpster in Broken Arrow, before on May the 19th his body was found floating only a few hundred yards from the party site. His lungs were filled with water, indicating he was alive upon entering the lake. There appeared to be indication of trauma on his body, but a medical examiner couldn't determine if it had originated from a beating or prolonged water exposure. The case went cold for 5 years due to a lack of evidence and actionable witness testimony, with the working theory being that an inebriated Jarrett had fallen into the lake and drowned. The toxicology report ultimately disproved that idea, and in 2012 the investigation was reopened, with Jarrett's ex-girlfriend among the first to be interviewed. The former reported that she received texts from Jarrett on the night of the party, but noted they appeared not to have been written by him. The sheriff's department began to suspect foul play. Others who joined the lakeside gathering were Anthony Wallen, Wayne Humphrey, and Brandon Hargrove, along with his older sister, Dana, and his girlfriend, Courtney Manza. Brandon died in a car accident in 2008. Upon being questioned, Courtney seemed to only vaguely recollect the events that had taken place on May the 13th, 6 years prior. She stated that Jarrett had entered a tent while she was alone inside before she heard Brandon, her boyfriend, call out his name. Dana and Anthony gave similarly muddled accounts and also changed their stories several times. Wayne Humphrey, who in 2012 was serving time for burglary and embezzlement, eventually brought clarity to the case. He reported that a conflict had sparked up between Brandon, Anthony, and Jarrett after the latter was accused of flirting with Courtney. Wayne admitted to holding Jarrett down while Anthony punched and kicked him with such force that even he felt the shock of the blows. Complementary to Wayne's report was that of a witness unassociated with the party who remembered hearing yelling, a thud, and a splash on the night, as well as seeing a truck driving up to the boat ramp. Another witness then came forward stating that Courtney had confessed to the murder. It ultimately emerged that after the vicious beating delivered by Anthony, she, Brandon, and Dana had dumped Jarrett, who was barely alive, into the lake. It was Brandon who then sent the text to Jarrett's ex-girlfriend before disposing of his phone. Courtney and Dana entered plea deals in 2014 and agreed to testify against Anthony. Courtney was in prison for 2 years as an accessory after the fact, while Dana admitted obstruction and was handed a 2-year probated sentence. Anthony eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit second-degree murder in 2016 and was sentenced to 8 years in prison and 12 years of parole. Number 3. Rebecca Palmer. British woman Rebecca Palmer from Royal Wootton Bassett, England, was jailed in October of 2017 for making false abuse claims against a soldier. The unnamed 20-year-old who served with the King's Royal Hussars in Tidworth had consensual relations with Palmer, after which he rejected a prospective relationship with her. Enraged, Palmer then embarked on a malicious campaign of framing him for abuse and harassment. She sent malicious communications to the victim, his friends, and members of his family. She created multiple fake friend profiles on social media and fabricated conversations which she hoped would be accepted as evidence of her claims. Adding to her list of machinations, Palmer had also falsely stated that the victim had posted intimate photos of her on Facebook. Her accusations resulted in the soldier being arrested on multiple occasions, questioned extensively, and held in custody for periods of time. After the man had initially made bail, Palmer told the police that he'd breached the conditions of his release by stalking and harassing her. She lied that she'd become pregnant and lost a baby following an attempt to take her own life. A web of lies eventually unraveled, and the fake abuse case came to light. When it did, others who'd previously interacted with the woman, then in her mid-20s, would characterize her as having always behaved like a vile, lying bully. Following her arrest, Palmer pleaded guilty to 5 offenses of malicious communications and 3 offenses of perverting the course of public justice. She was jailed for 5 years and later tried to appeal the sentence. Her lawyers claimed that the original punishment had been excessive and hadn't considered Palmer's severe mental health difficulties, which reportedly stemmed from her personality disorders and being kicked in the head by a horse as a child. The appeal was, however, rejected as 3 judges found there was nothing wrong with her sentence. Number 2. Fa Ziying and Lao Rongji. From 1996 to 1999, Chinese couple Fa Ziying and Lao Rongji were responsible for a string of kidnappings, robberies, and murders carried out in Nanchang, Wenzhou, Changzhou, and Hefei. They killed 7 people before Fa was arrested in July of 1999. While he was collecting a ransom at the home of their last victim, he was executed later that same year. Fa had lied to the police during his interviews and thus helped Lao, his serial killer partner, evade capture. The woman remained on the run for roughly 2 decades. She reportedly had surgery to change her appearance and used multiple aliases to travel through the country. Lao made a living by working part-time in bars and other entertainment venues and changed cities before suspicions could arise, an existence which she'd describe as living in darkness. She was eventually identified as a fugitive and arrested in November of 2019 while she was working under an alias and selling watches at a mall in Xiamen. During a subsequent hearing, she reported that her involvement in the spree only extended to luring the victims and robbing them, while Fa handled the violence. Lao also reported that she'd been an unwilling participant in the spree and that she'd been coerced through abuse by her boyfriend, whose methods she described as very cruel. The court, however, held her responsible for 2 deaths and found that she'd been directly involved in 5 killings. She was sentenced to death on September the 9th of 2021 and promptly appealed the decision. Number 1. Taylor Renee Parker. On the morning of October the 9th of 2020, law enforcement in New Boston, Texas, conducted a traffic stop after witnessing a woman later identified as Taylor Renee Parker speeding and driving erratically. Officers discovered that Parker, who was then in her late 20s, appeared to have just given birth. She told the police that she'd had her baby by the side of the road and that the child wasn't breathing. They were both rushed to the McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. The baby girl was pronounced dead on arrival and suspicions arose when Parker refused to be checked out by staff. A horrific discovery soon followed. In a bid to keep her boyfriend from leaving her, Parker had faked a pregnancy for roughly 10 months leading up to the incident. Her elaborate lie included wearing pregnancy disguises in real life and in her social media posts, faking ultrasounds and even having a gender reveal party. Then, on October the 9th, she went to the new Boston home of her pregnant friend, Reagan Simmons Hancock, aged 21. Parker ambushed the woman, stabbed her over 100 times, and crushed her skull with a hammer. Simmons Hancock was still alive when Parker cut her with a scalpel from hip to hip and ripped her daughter from her womb. She then fled the house with the child, intending to pass her off as her own, and left Simmons Hancock's other daughter, aged 3, alone with her as she bled to death. Evidence indicated that Parker had extensively researched how to fake a pregnancy online and how to deliver babies preterm at 35 weeks, which was how far along Simmons Hancock was when she killed her. Parker was arrested after the victim's body was discovered, and she was ultimately found guilty of capital murder, for which she was sentenced to death in November of 2022. Thanks for watching. Do you agree with capital punishment? Let us know in the comments section below.